Just who the hell do you think you are? Mrs. Smith snapped, while staring at the young man before her. The fury in her expression could not be described with words, and if stares could kill, then Oscar would have dropped dead less than a second ago. Ma'am, please understand me. I think we should carry out a proper investigation before concluding that You dare speak to me? Mrs. Smith interjected. You had one job, Mr. Oscar, and if there was anyone I trusted with all my heart, then it was you. As the financial secretary, I do not expect nearly $3 million to leave the company account. Without you knowing about it, then what is your job? Oscar kept his gaze fixed on the desk. He couldn't dare look at Mrs. Smith, who was already convinced that he stole the company's money. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, but I believe that there is more to the story than the detective has told us. He added, I don't want to hear your explanations, Mr. Zero Scar. I need a man that I can trust and not a 26-year-old that robs me in broad daylight. Mrs. Smith chipped in. All evidence pointed to Oscar, so much so that even a child would easily be convinced that he was the thief. And having been fed with these false pieces of information, Mrs. Smith was not going to take any chances. I need every single company paper in your possession returned to me within the next 2 hours. Round up whatever it is you have to do today and leave this premises. Do not, and I repeat myself, do not step foot into this establishment again. You are fired. Oscar could not believe his ears. How could a year's worth of trust crumble to dust within 2 days? How could his only source of income slip past his hand because of someone else's mistake? The investigation only lasted 2 days, which was surprising. Oscar suspected that the detective was involved in the theft as well, especially since he was recommended to Mrs. Smith by the same men whom he suspected to have stolen the money. Ma'am, please, just give me 1 week to carry out a proper investigation. I'm very sure that in no time, the real thief will be found and your money will be returned to you, Oscar. She cut him off. Get out of my office. Don't force me to throw out. I'm very sure that the $3 million you stole would be enough for you and your family to live on. Just know that you'll return every bit of it. She added with a straight face. Can you just give me a second to explain, ma'am? Oscar uttered, his brows creasing in fury. He'd rather be thrown into a pit full of serpents than acknowledge these false accusations. Wow! Mrs. Smith exclaimed in surprise. You are shouting at me now, I see? Trust me, Oscar. By the time I'm done with you, you'll regret the very first day you met me. Leave. She ordered him and pointed to the door with a fierce gaze. Without saying another word, Oscar headed for the door. He stopped for a second and stole a glance at the lady who had just fired him without a second thought. I must expose those who did this, he mumbled and walked out of the office, gently closing the door behind him. Tisk, tisk. Oscar had barely gone halfway through the hall when the voice of a young man mocked him from behind. Just the man I was looking for, said the voice, and Oscar turned around briskly to face the 30-years-old figure behind him. And you are looking for me, why? He asked. His gaze was intense, and it was obvious to the man that he was not in a good mood for baseless discussions. I heard you are the thief. Everyone is just as shocked as I am. Jacob, please. Oscar cut him off. I know what you and all your counterparts did, and I'm going to prove to Mrs. Smith that I have no hand in this. He added as he stood before his biggest suspect, Jacob McCarthy, the same man willing to do anything to watch Oscar's downfall. And how do you suppose you'll do that now that you have been fired? Oscar walked away before Jacob could finish his last words. He was convinced that Jacob had plotted everything to get him fired. Besides, becoming the financial secretary was Jacob's dream before Oscar snatched it away with higher qualifications and better working experience. But if this case wasn't sorted out soon, then Oscar's name would forever be tainted. Taking a deep breath and determined to get to the bottom of this, Oscar dashed into his office to retrieve the company's documents that Mrs. Smith requested. 3 hours later, Oscar's car pulled up in front of a luxurious apartment, and the exterior design exhibited nothing but the lavishing wealth of its occupants. As soon as he stepped out of the car, Oscar raised his brow at the red Benz that was parked next to his father-in-law's car. Did he buy a new car again? He wondered because his father-in-law was fond of changing his cars like he changed his underwear. He quickly parried those thoughts. They weren't as important as what had happened to him at the office. Getting fired and Mrs. Smith making sure that his accounts were restricted until her money was returned, coupled with the threat to send him to jail if he failed to deliver in 2 months. Oscar was devastated. It took a lot of self-control to not cry back home. Besides, what will my tears change? He had asked himself. As soon as he walked through the door, Oscar felt as though the clock stopped ticking and the universe stopped spinning. His jaws dropped in astonishment as he stared from his mother-in-law to his wife, who was holding hands and flirting with a stranger. As soon as she set eyes on him, Ellen withdrew her hand for the stranger, with an expression of shock mixed with guilt. She turned to her mother, who had a mischievous smile on her face, and then back to Oscar. The stranger, on the other hand, did nothing but stare at Oscar with a smile. He couldn't help but behold the piece of trash that Ellen was married to, and he was fulfilled to see the jealousy in Oscar's eyes. It was just the expression he wanted to see. Oscar snapped back to reality. He had already imagined strangling the stranger to death for flirting with his wife, but refused to react until he could understand what was happening. "Can I see you?" he said to Ellen, and began walking up the stairs without waiting for her response, because the longer he stared at the stranger, the more he was tempted to react. When Oscar walked into the bedroom, he sat down on the edge of the bed with a sigh and waited for Ellen. All he wanted to hear was whether it was a prank or an illusion. Anything other than these was sure to fuel the fire that had been ignited by the incident at work. Just the moment he was waiting for. Ellen opened the door and walked in slowly, her long dark hair resting on her shoulder, while her beautiful face was hidden behind an expression of guilt. Oscar stood up immediately and walked up to her. The speed at which he did made Ellen feel like he was going to hit her, but Oscar only closed the door that she left open and asked, "What was that? Who is he?" "Oscar, listen to me." Ellen was yet to complete her statement when Oscar cut her off. "Why was he holding you like that? Who the hell is he?" "Oscar," Ellen snapped. "Can you allow me to talk?" she asked, and stared directly into his eyes. She could tell that he was already frustrated and felt bad that she was going to add to it. "I'm listening," Oscar replied, and walked back to the bed. He sat down and stared at his wife, waiting for whatever she had to say. "That man you saw out there," she began. "His name is Michael Hudson, son of Willem Hudson, CEO of the Caribbean Enterprise. Enough about his name or his worth." Oscar snapped. "I just want to know what he is doing here, holding your hands like that." "He wants me to marry him," Ellen answered and averted her gaze immediately. She couldn't stand the look on his face when she said those words. Oscar, on the other hand, felt like a bomb had exploded inside his chest. He couldn't understand why a man in his right senses would see a woman with a wedding ring and still approach her for marriage. "What are you saying?" he asked her. Oscar stood up and walked up to her. He used his hand to move her chin so that she faced him directly. "What do you mean? Don't shout at me, Oscar." Ellen slapped his hand off her face. "Just know that this is not about you. It's about protecting my father's company. He needs a successor." The more she talked, the more Oscar was left confused. How could his father-in-law need a successor and not consider him worthy, but rather a total stranger just because he had some societal influence? "What about me?" he asked her. "Why would you want to marry someone else just because your father needs a successor? Why didn't he just pick me? You and I know that you are not worthy to take over my father's company. You don't have any influential background. You work as a financial secretary for a very small organization that no one on earth recognizes. You are just not rich enough." Ellen explained and walked away from him. She went to the side table drawer and took out a piece of paper and a pen. Oscar, on the other hand, was having a hard time processing the information he just received. He was speechless, angry, hopeless, and confused all at once. "What is this?" he asked when Ellen handed the paper over to him. Ellen took a deep breath. She was positive that this was the right choice. Not that she wanted to do it, but to secure her father's company. She had no choice. "It's a divorce paper. You can sign it whenever you want to. But I'm leaving this house in 2 days." "Ellen, are you seriously giving me a divorce paper to sign? Are you seriously leaving me for that man?" Ellen, I lost my job today. My account is frozen because I was falsely accused of theft, and then I come home to meet this. Ellen was dumbfounded. She was right about him already being frustrated. But she had made this choice long before now and wasn't backing out. This is the reason why we can't be together, Oscar. I love you, but we aren't compatible. Let's call a spade a spade. You have no future, she said and tried to hold back the tears that threatened to escape her eyes. I married you and waited, and told myself that one day you'll be wealthy. But it's been 2 years and there is no progress. Once again, I'm not doing this because I hate you, but to secure my father's company. Sign the divorce paper whenever you want to, she concluded and threw the paper and pen on the bed. She gave Oscar one last stare and said, I hope you become wealthy at some point in your life. Ellen walked out of the room and slammed the door behind her, leaving Oscar to decide whether or not he wanted to sign those papers. No, this is a dream, Oscar told himself as he sat back on the bed with the paper in his hand. He believed that such a coincidence was too good to be true, losing his job and wife in one day, but he refused to believe it. Just who the hell does that fool think he is? Oscar stood up and rushed out of the room like a wild beast. He couldn't sit back and watch a man take his wife away and do nothing about it. If he is going to take my wife, then he has to go through me first, he exclaimed in a fit of rage and rushed downstairs. Oscar's presence startled everyone in the living room due to his pace and furious gaze. He didn't hesitate to grab Michael by his collar and lift him off the chair. Take your filthy hands off my clothes, you imbecile, Michael warned him with a sneer. For someone as wealthy as he was, he couldn't bring himself to wrestle with a man that he considered to be worthless. Ellen, please, money should not be the reason behind all of this. We had a house, and due to the cost of rent, I came to live here with your family for a while. You saw the documents a few days ago, Ellen. I own a house now. Well, it's a good thing. She cut him off again. You can move in there and have a happy life, Oscar. I already told you that money is not my problem, but my father's company matters to me, she added. But then as soon as she realized that it was wrong to say that before Michael, she quickly corrected herself and said, and I love Michael. He knows how to treat a woman with respect. All you know how to do is demand respect and submission. The world has advanced. Oscar, this is not the 17th century. Oscar was speechless. Words could not describe the level of disbelief capable of making a man dumb in an instant. That is not true, he tried to defend himself. He had done so much to make this woman happy. Of course, he wasn't the richest man on the planet, but he always made sure that they were comfortable. With his little job that he had just lost, he provided a lot without asking for a dime from his in-law. So what did he do that was so wrong to deserve such hate? There was only one place a man like him could go to right now to clear his mind. Be it a sin or not, he didn't care. He believed that a few shots would help regain his lost sanity and knock him out of the universe long enough to forget his problems. Then afterwards, he can face them again and think of a way forward. The smell of cigarettes filled the air. Alcohol and laughter from both responsible and irresponsible men echoed throughout the room. Yet one man sat at the far end, spending the last few West Arcadian dollars in his pocket on a bottle of drink. Mind if I join you, mate? A tall man whose face was barely visible under the dim light requested, and without waiting for Oscar's reply, he drew out the chair opposite him and sat down. What's good? The man asked, and Oscar felt irritated. He wanted nothing more than to sit alone and wished the folk would quit bothering him. Nothing good, man, he replied, without hiding the fact that he felt disturbed. You know, the man continued, after taking a sip from his bottle of Baijiu, if you don't want to talk about something, it's okay to say so. No need to feel bothered. He concluded and lit the cigarette after carefully placing it in between his lips. Do you smoke? He asked, handing his second cigarette to Oscar, who politely declined. No, thank you, he replied. I do, but not tonight. He lied with a sigh. He wondered how the man knew that he was bothered, yet failed to stop bothering him. By the way, the name is Wales. Lost my mom earlier today. I loved her so much, he uttered, and Oscar could already tell that the man just needed company. That's all. Sorry about that, he uttered. Lost my job, and my wife recently. He also confessed. Besides, what would silence do for him other than keep him thinking about what he didn't want to think about? Oh, she died? Wades asked, wearing a sympathetic look. Yes, Oscar replied. He couldn't bring himself to tell the random man what truly transpired between Ellen and him. Sorry, man. And your job too. You know, coming here to drink after losing your job and wife wouldn't help matters. You'd leave and still have to face it. He emphasized each word like he truly meant them, speaking like a therapist, a tipsy one at that. You are doing the same thing, Oscar argued, as it made no sense that a fellow bird would tell another that flying was wrong. No, Wades interjected. I have a job, you don't. I can buy myself 10 bottles and still have a lot of money on me, you can't. He added, and Oscar raised a brow. What is he getting at? Listen here, man, Wades continued. If you think coming to this dark place to drink will soothe you, then you are just wrong. I'd rather take a bath and take a walk in the park with headphones on. Wades concluded. He stood up and dropped the cigarette on the floor, stepping on it to put it out. Pay for your drink when you are done, he said, and placed a few dollar bills on the table, before walking away without giving Oscar a chance to thank him or ask questions. After Wade's swift disappearance, Oscar reflected on what the man had said. He had $3 million to pay back to a company that he did not steal from, yet he was sitting here drinking. He was just living the moment and he knew it, but now that the stranger had pointed it out, he saw no point. Picking up the money, Oscar counted the notes only to realize that he had left 5 notes, each a $100 bill. What the hell? He was stunned, checking again to make sure he hadn't counted wrongly. He had no way to contact the man, so he paid for the drink and quickly rushed out of the bar, hoping to get a glimpse of him at least. He sighed when the man was nowhere in sight. Before he could turn around and leave, 2 police cars parked in front of him. He was startled for a moment, knowing that his boss at work had threatened to get him arrested, but he expected that she would give him some time to attempt to pay back. The officer hurriedly walked out of the car. Excuse me. He politely approached Oscar, not wanting to scare the man off. He stared at the image on the phone in his hand and back to Tristan. The plate number on the car not so far away from him also matches the one he was given. Are you Mr. Oscar? He asked, and Oscar instinctively knew that he was the one they were after. Yes. He nodded. What more could he do? Running from a cop in West Arcadia would only get you into more trouble than you are already in. Okay. We'd like you to come to the station with us. Please cooperate and make this easy for yourself. Okay? The cop uttered, keeping a calm countenance as well as the others. Having guessed why they came for him, Oscar sighed heavily. Okay, he mumbled. At least it was better than public embarrassment for something he wasn't guilty about. Thank you. The cop acknowledged his submission and guided him to the car. Once seated inside the car, Oscar closed his eyes for a moment. He knew there was no way to get himself out of this situation unless an investigation was carried out without the company's consent. No one would listen to his suggestion because he was the victim and all evidence pointed to him, else he'd have asked for Jacob McCarthy to be interrogated. The good thing about the police department in West Arcadia was that they were very critical in their investigations. Sooner or later, he knew that the truth would come out and he would be free. He looked at the cash in his hand and sighed. Wades, he mumbled, before finding a way to put them in his pocket while waiting for the police car to arrive at the station, where his fate for the next few days or even months will be decided. Carefully fill this form, Mr. Oscar. One of the cops handed a white piece of paper to him while he stood at the counter. Without responding, Oscar took the paper and pen from her and silently filled up the document, after which he handed it back to the cop. You left the surname blank, the female cop complained, and Oscar nodded his head. I know, he said. Is there a reason why? She asked him with a hint of curiosity in her eyes. I never met my parents, and I don't use the surname given to me by the court. I don't like it. I only used them for document's sake. Oscar replied, and the cop sighed. I'm sorry, she said. It's okay, Oscar uttered and followed her to the chief's office, the man who will decide his fate for the time being. Good evening, please sit down. He ushered, and Oscar did as he said, all while keeping a straight face and composed demeanor. After looking through the files in front of him, The chief looked up to Oscar and said, "I believe that you are aware of these reports?" "Yes, sir," Oscar replied. "What do you have to say about it?" asked the chief in an interrogative manner. With a sigh, Oscar replied, "I can say that I am innocent, but who would believe me? I was framed, and it was done to get back at me. But what evidence do I have to prove it? Stop trying to act smart, Oscar, it doesn't fool anyone." The chief cut him off with a frown. This wasn't the first time that a culprit had tried to play the victim so well that it was easy to believe them. So to him, Oscar was just doing the same. "You asked me a question, sir, and I am trying to answer. If only an investigation could be carried out without the company's consent, you'd know the truth for yourself." "I see," uttered the chief. "And why should we carry out such an investigation? We are not well paid for this, and you don't look like you can pay your rent, let alone our department to carry out such an investigation." Oscar could not believe his ears. Everything he has heard about the West Arcadian Police Department was a lie. People said they were trustworthy, passionate about their job, and steadfast in the pursuit of the truth. No one mentioned they ask for payments too. "I should have expected this," Oscar thought to himself. "Every sector is gradually being corrupted." Mr. Oscar?" The chief snapped him out of those train of thoughts. "How much are you willing to pay to make us do that?" "You saw the report, sir." Oscar cut him off. "She fired me, and the financial crime agency froze my account after the report got to them. I don't even have nearly $1 million in my account. If I stole the company's money, wouldn't it be in there?" "Well, it is not as if you opened a secret account where you kept it." The chief scoffed annoyingly, and Oscar almost slapped himself across the face. "You are unbelievable, sir," he uttered, and the cop stood up with an irritated expression. "And what is that supposed to mean?" he asked, and Oscar knew that he was not getting justice for sure. "You clearly saying that I am asking for a bride, don't you?" he asked. "Isn't it obvious?" Oscar wanted to say but held his tongue to avoid further complications. "I am only saying, sir, that I am innocent and would appreciate a proper investigation before a sentence." Oscar tried to clarify, but in his mind, he couldn't help but hate the chief to the core. "Listen here, Oscar. I am only going to work for who will pay me, and not who tells me thank you and go away." "He paid you to arrest me?" Oscar asked. He couldn't help but feel that Joseph McCarthy also had a hand in this because it couldn't just be a chief acting out of greed. "And what if he did?" The chief asked him with a frown. "You are just trying to get words out of my mouth, young man, and I am afraid that you won't hear what you are expecting." Without further ado, the chief punched a few buttons on the telephone that was on his desk. "Hello?" he said, placing it on his ear. "Send 2 of them in here immediately," he uttered and dropped the call. Without context, Oscar already knew what was going to happen to him. Matters had turned from bad to worse, and it was all because he had no money to grease the chief's palm. "Money truly is everything these days," he scoffed. "I'm afraid you will be detained until our investigation is complete," the chief uttered, when 2 officers walked into his office as he had requested over the telephone. "Because I have no money, huh?" he asked the chief with a disdainful glare. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he added, and the chief cut him off with a loud voice. "Shut up," he said, and turned to the cops. "Take him away, this one is hopeless." Without struggling so much, Oscar left the cops walk him out of the office as they headed for the detention chamber. Meanwhile, the chief sat back in his office, grumbling as he scribbled a few figures on his document when suddenly he received a notification. Using advanced technology, the detective department can recreate what a missing person would look like till a certain age, keeping the police department updated on the new image just in case they are found. And the notification just came into the chief's device on a person who had gone missing at birth, nearly 26 years. Usually, he'd ignore it to check later, but this time, he opened the PNG file to look at the image and his jaws dropped in astonishment. "Hell no way," he exclaimed, and immediately transferred the image from the computer to his phone and dashed out of the office. "What chamber was Mr. Oscar taken?" he asked the lady at the counter. "Chamber 4C. The chief ran in that direction before the lady could finish speaking.